Hello everyone, my name is Dale Tate. Thank you for watching this video. My presentation is about Title IX and its impact on the sporting world since 1972. We'll go over kind of how it changed athletics and the challenges it faces and the progress that still needs to be made. So what is Title IX? Title IX was passed in 1972 as part of a larger federal education amendments law and reforms that went on. I know you're not supposed to read directly from your slide, but it's important to get this one right. So, the meat of Title IX says, quote, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance," end quote. So what does that mean? Basically, it means you can't be discriminated in any way in a federally funded program based on your sex. This had a really big impact on sports specifically, where a lot of federally funded universities had drastically different opportunities available to men and women. For myself, I have two daughters, both who played sports or are still playing sports, actually. And even in the early 2000s and the 2010s, there were still drastic differences between what my girls got opportunity-wise, funding-wise, available to them versus what the boys' teams had. My daughter Grace, who was in this very same class with us that we're watching this video for, her softball team had an abandoned building that was donated to them with rats and spiders and no air conditioning. That was their locker room. That was a half a mile from their field down a big old hill. Whereas the boys had a brand new field house with relatively state-of-the-art locker rooms and a hitting facility all attached right to the baseball field. In no way, shape, or form is that equal opportunities. So we've kind of felt this even here in our little corner of Georgia, like the differences between how men's sports are treated and the funding for boys sports compared to the girls. So even with the disparities that still exist now, it's not really anything compared to what it was pre-Title IX. So in 1971, you only had 295,000 girls participating in high school athletics across every high school in the entire United States. Similarly, in college, there was only 30,000 women participating in college athletics, just across the board. That's not scholarship athletes, that's literally all of them. So there was really no funding, there were no scholarships available, there were very few women's teams at the college level, much less pretty much zero at the professional level. They also dealt with the sort of social barriers. Pre-1972, you were kind of considered a tomboy or weird if you were a woman and wanted to play sports. So the opportunities just really weren't there for women in athletics. So in 1972, when they passed these Title IX, you saw an almost immediate increase in the female participation in sports. By 1980, which was 8 years after the passage, you were already up to nearly 1.7 million girls playing high school sports. That's a drastic increase over that 295. As you can see on the table on the screen, by 2022, which is the most recent statistics that I could find that I felt were accurate, there was almost 3.3 million girls playing at the high school level. Similarly, in college, you went from those 30,000 women participating in college sports to 216,000. That still seems to me like a pretty low number, but it nevertheless, compared to pre-Title IX, is a pretty drastic increase in the number of women participating in collegiate sports. Colleges have to, they're forced to offer equal opportunities. There's more scholarships available to the female athletes. You did have some legal battles and some resistance to these new rules. Schools argued that it was too costly. They would have to cut men's sports. They felt the resources were too valuable to use on women. They needed to save them for the men. But there have been some pretty important legal cases that have sort of reestablished the fact that you have to have equal opportunities across the genders. One of the more important cases for establishing precedents and reinforcing Title IX was the case of Cohen versus Brown University in 1996. In this case, Brown University's argument was, quote, women were not as interested in sports as men, end quote. That was their argument for not having to provide equal funding to men and women's sports. They had taken surveys, and the interest in sports seemed to be more on the men's side. I will state again, this was 1996. This was not 1976. It wasn't 1946. In 1996, Brown University was saying, we don't have to provide equal funding because women don't care as much about sports as men. Whether that is true or not, this case reinforced Title IX that you have to provide equal opportunities. You can't rely on whatever interest surveys you have or what you think about men versus women, who likes sports the most. None of that matters. The ruling, Brown University's argument was disregarded, and basically they were forced to provide equal opportunities for men and women because of this case. There are lots of debates still ongoing as far as what does equal opportunities mean. I can't tell you how these arguments ended because they still are going on. Is it equal opportunities strictly from a dollar perspective? Is it number of athletes? Is it number of teams? There's lots of these things going back and forth, possibly something that could lead to an entire other discussion outside of this one. There is no American football for women. Maybe there should be, maybe there shouldn't be. But either way, a normal college football program has 85 scholarships. They might have 100 or 110 kids on the team, depending on walk-ons and all of that. There is no comparable female sport that has 110 players on it. So, does equal opportunities mean you have to have more women's sports so that you can equal those 110 athletes on the men team? Or do you just have to have an equal number of teams? Do you have to have an equal number of money spent overall on all sports? These things are getting argued yearly currently as we're going. There are also new discussions that have also not been decided about what type of Title IX protection is provided for, say, transgendered athletes or for esports. The esports argument kind of got decided in 2023. There was a court case that said you don't have to provide Title IX protections to esports, basically summarizing because it's not a real sport. It's not an actual physical activity that happens out on a field of grass or in a gymnasium or whatever. The transgendered laws, as any of us that pay attention in the media right now know, these are still debates that are going on currently as we speak, and it'll be interesting to see kind of how it plays out, whether or not Title IX will cover transgendered athletes or whether it won't. We will all just have to wait and see what the answer to that is. From a marketing perspective, the disparities in funding for the men and women's programs has also led to a disparity in the amount of money that these teams can spend on marketing their women's programs. It's pretty hard to raise awareness of a program if you don't have the dollars to spend on a marketing campaign and you don't have the resources available to you. So it's kind of a chicken versus the egg. It's like, does women's sports have less fans because people don't want to watch women's sports, or is it because they just haven't had the resources to get into the public eye enough to create the same fans and the same awareness that the men's teams have? There is no answer to that. It could be in an alternate world, had these women's programs been given equal funding from the very beginning, that the women's leagues, A, more of them would exist, and B, they might be equally as popular as men's. You just don't know. We don't live in that world. Today, marketing and sponsorships are very important for women's programs. The opportunities are still less than for men's programs, but with the advent of some digital platforms and stuff like that, it is easier to mount targeted campaigns to try to raise awareness at less cost by using social media and stuff like that. That these women can actually get their voices out there and they can get more awareness without having to put an ad in a magazine or on the side of a bus or a billboard, whatever the sort of traditional pre-internet world looked like. Um, they can also use these new platforms to help build stronger brands. And the stronger brand a female athlete can build for herself, or a team or a league can build for themselves, then the sponsorships will come, because the sponsorships are going to go to where the viewers are. The media plays a huge role in how women's sports are viewed. Um, Traditionally, women are really underrepresented in mass media in your traditional media outlets compared to the men's teams. Just there's nowhere near as much coverage of women's sports as there is of men's sports in your traditional media outlets. Um, Even when women's sports were covered, there were some pretty serious biases in how these traditional media outlets covered men's sports versus women's sports. Men tend to be lauded and praised for our athletic achievements, and the women were concentrated on their looks or their personalities, and they were trying to find the feel-good stories, but very rarely did they just actually say, you're a female athlete, let's talk about your prowess in your sport. It's pretty terrible, the distinction between how they cover men's and women's sports. Again, we talked about it on the last slide. The digital media is helping to improve this a little bit. Women can go out and build a brand for themselves. They shouldn't have to, but they can get themselves in front of people using digital media and social media and just build that brand for themselves. You know, for most men's athletes that are good, the media is going to build that brand for them, and then the sponsorships roll in. Well, women are having to do this work for themselves. So a quick side note, this female athlete on your screen right now, she's going to be posting her current event here in a couple of weeks, travel and tourism. So I would love for everybody to leave her comments about how it felt to break a $350 bat in this batting cage. While it was a very proud moment for a dad, it was also a $350 bat. So let's go and talk to Grace when she posts her video about how that felt and if she really thought about what she did. So even with the definitive good that Title IX has done over the years, there are still a lot of challenges for women's sports and equality. The biggest is just equal pay. You know, the U.S. women's national soccer team, they're the ones who win things. They win matches, whereas the men do not. They get just as many, correct that, they get more viewers than the men's team does, and yet the men's team still makes more money. So even from all traditional marketing, they get more viewers, they get more wins. Why are they not getting more money? They do not, they get less. There's still tons of funding gaps, both at professional, collegiate, high school levels, even at rec ball, like, you know, where my girls started in recreation departments. The stuff the boys teams got is drastically different than the stuff the girls teams got. And also, in the county where my kids grew up, the girls teams were the only ones winning anything. They were the only ones bringing you trophies. The boys teams didn't win anything at all, and yet they still got more opportunities and they got more funding. You also see this in the coaching roles. Even in women's sports, most of the coaches are men. There's just not a lot of women coaching. It's getting more and more as the years go by, but there's still a pretty big underrepresentation of women in the coaching roles, men and women's, but even in the women's sports, there's still an awful lot of men's coaches. And then we've already talked about the facilities and the resources. It's just still night and day, the difference between what's provided for women's teams compared to their men's counterparts. So is 2025 now. What can we do now to continue building on these Title IX protections and continue closing that gap between the genders in sports? The first and most important is just increased investment. That's simple things like investment in time, investment in resources, and probably most importantly, just investment in money and funding. Um, Women's teams need better media coverage and they need stronger marketing campaigns. Traditionally, none of that stuff happens without good funding. You can't have a good marketing campaign without paying for it. And generally, if you have a good marketing campaign, the media coverage will follow. Another thing that we really need is stronger enforcement of these Title IX laws. Um, Most colleges and universities have a compliance officer that deals with all of this, but that compliance officer works directly for the athletic department, and it's really hard to police your boss on following the rules. So having independent compliance officers and enforcement of these laws, nothing is going to change. The laws don't do any good unless you enforce them. So something really needs to be done about, we have the laws, let's do something to force these colleges and universities to actually follow the laws and provide equal opportunities across the genders. Um, another quick side note, couldn't put one kid in without the other. So that's my oldest daughter. She's graduated from softball and volleyball and basketball and all of this to where now she plays roller derby. And if you haven't been to roller derby, it's really a good time. You should find your local roller derby team and go because it's awesome. But this is another example. It's a women's sports league. They basically are self-funded. They have very few scholarships. They go out of town. They pay for their own hotel rooms. Meanwhile, we do have men's roller derby teams or co-ed roller derby teams that have full sponsors. We saw some of those in a tournament just last month that everything was paid for, their hotel rooms, everything, because that's just how it works. So yeah, go see roller derby. If you're in Athens, come on out. So in conclusion, Title IX is awesome. It's made a lot of changes. It was important. Sometimes it's easy to lose that fact in this kind of presentation because we spent most of our time talking about what still needs to be improved. But Title IX was truly groundbreaking at the time, and it set the foundation for all the conversations that have come since then. I think it was a fantastic idea, but we have to continue fighting for that equality, both men and women in general, and in life, and in sports, and in the business world. These are challenges that everybody is facing today still, but specifically for this conversation, there's still a long way to go. We need more audience engagement. We need more people advocating for women's sports. I've been guilty of this. You recognize the disparities and you just go on about your business because that's how life works and things aren't fair, but it's going to take people to do what I didn't do and actually cause a stink and go get in front of whoever it is that can make differences and let them know that these things are important. So anyway, thank you for watching my video. We got some references coming up in the next couple of slides. Thanks for sticking around for that. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your week.